On today's show, how Kevin Durant's game-changing impact will elevate the Houston Rockets this upcoming season. What offensive and defensive changes can we expect? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform you're choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your very first year. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. This is an episode that I've been wanting to get to for a minute now, but we've had so many, Rockets have been so active this offseason with signings and extensions and trades and so much other stuff that haven't had a chance to get to it yet. And that is, how does Kevin Durant fit the Houston Rockets? How do you slot in this two-time champion, future first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest scorers to ever touch the basketball? How does he fit into a team that just won 52 games this prior season? The easy answer is you just slot him in pretty seamlessly, and you should be really, really, really good, and you might win 60 plus games next year. But we're going to get into the actual nitty gritty. We'll talk about some of the offensive stuff. We'll talk about some of maybe the concerns with the lack of guard depth, maybe some concerns with the playmaking front for this Rockets team next season, as well as expectations for the defensive side of the basketball. But where I want to start first here is just addressing the fact that, look, the reason that I was so fervently championing a Kevin Durant trade in the first place, as were many others, was because the Rockets' biggest weakness, their Achilles heel this past season, was their lack of a go-to scorer, their lack of a true star-level scorer who could put the team on his back and get them through the tough stretches, you know, when the team hits an offensive drought or at the end of a close game. They didn't have that. They had their equal opportunity offense that Ime Udoka preached about. They had their mantra, sometimes you, sometimes me, always us. And that was cute and it was nice, but it was also frustrating to watch at times because on any given night, the Rockets really didn't know who their best player was going to be. They really didn't know who their first option was going to be. They didn't even really know who their second and third options were going to be. They had like a rough idea that like Jalen and Sengun were going to do a lot of the heavy lifting, but on any given night, it could be Fred or Jabari or Dylan or whoever. And it worked sometimes. It also didn't work sometimes. And it really didn't work against the Warriors because in the playoffs, when things slow down, when the defense ratchets up, you need a guy who can go get you a bucket. And that's what the Rockets have added in Kevin Durant, one of the greatest scorers to ever touch a basketball. And so on the surface, that is the Rockets have addressed quite arguably their biggest weakness from this past season. Their other biggest weakness by extension was just they were an atrocious half-court offense and one of the worst shooting teams in all of basketball. Per cleaning the glass, the Rockets were a bottom 10 team in points per play last season in the half court. So points per play last season, Rockets only averaged 93.2 points per play, which ranks in the bottom 10. That's 22nd out of 30 NBA teams. Now, their half court offense was actually a little bit better than that because it was propped up by their offensive rebounding. So their actual offensive rating clocked in at 12th at 116.3. per cleaning the glass. Now you go look at the Phoenix Suns last season. The Suns, despite all their struggles, all the mess that is Phoenix right now, or was Phoenix, still is kind of. The Suns were a top 10 team in points per play in the half court, 108 points per play. And their offensive rating, including offensive rebounds and second chance opportunities and everything, they were actually right behind the Houston Rockets at 13th per cleaning the glass at 116 points per 100 possessions. And a large reason for that is that tall, lanky dude the Rockets just traded for, Kevin Durant. The Rockets are effectively swapping out Jalen Green, who was a 21 point per game scorer on really rough shooting splits, 42, 35, 81, for a 26.5 point per game scorer on 53, 43, 83 shooting splits. And that 83, the free throw shooting is like, that was one of the, I think it might've been the worst of KD's career, actually. He's usually more like a 90% free throw shooter. So they basically got a guy who's been flirting for most of his career with being a member of the 50, 40, 90 club. And so on the surface, one of the biggest changes, biggest adjustments that we can expect offensively from the Rockets this next season is the equal opportunity offense, gone. KD is your be-all, end-all. KD is the number one option. He is the best player on the floor. Everything the Rockets do is going to run through KD in some capacity. He's going to be your number one option. And then that means that you're going to have, in some capacity, right, probably Alperen Sengun, Ime Thompson as your 2-3 options offensively. Maybe even mixing a little Fred VanVleet there. Maybe Ime Thompson is still more of in kind of an ancillary role earlier on in the season. So maybe it's like KD 1, Sengun 2, Fred 3, and then Ime/Jabari 4, 5, whatever in some capacity. Although I would hope that Ime Thompson would be given some more opportunity to really spread his wings and try to get some reps offensively. So I would hope that Ime Thompson walks away with more overall offensive opportunities than Fred VanVleet, but it might not be that way right from the jump. And so because of that clearly defined offensive hierarchy, I think it'll help make everything easier for everybody else, right? Because now it doesn't have to be, Alperen Sengun commands a double team and then kicks it out, and then he's kicking it out to a poor 3-point shooter. It's Alperen Sengun commands a double team and he gets to kick it out to Kevin Durant, who's a 40% plus 3-point shooter, or Fred VanVleet, who's coming off a down year shooting the basketball. But one of the reasons that I think Fred is going to actually thrive moving forward, playing next to Kevin Durant, is there's less offensive pressure on Fred VanVleet to create something out of nothing, because the Rockets were so heavily reliant on Jalen Green to be their offensive initiator, to be their leading scorer, to attract the double team, to collapse the defense, to do so much. And on the nights where Jalen struggled, on the nights where Jalen just didn't have it, Fred had to try and step up and do something, or the Rockets offense was kaput. They didn't have anything. Now they have Kevin Durant, who's a certified walking bucket and is clearly the number one option. So there aren't going to be nights where, Fred VanVleet has to start chucking and hoisting up shots and trying to take over a game because Jalen Green just didn't have it in his bag that night against a specific team or a coverage, or just had an off shooting night. It's not to say KD won't have the occasional off shooting night, but he's one of the most efficient players in basketball history for a reason. And now you have a better hierarchy where you get to go through KD for a lot of your offense. You still get to work through Alperen Sengun a considerable amount. You still get to run through Ime Thompson and have him be a terror in transition, as well as letting him get downhill and attack, give him some 5-out spacing and let him go to work. And so you get Fred in a much more ancillary role offensively, which I think will ultimately bode well for him. And we should see a season where his 3-point shooting rebounds and gets back up to, the range that we're more comfortable with it at, that 37, 38, 39% range would be fantastic from Fred. And then you have Jabari as well offensively. So you reinsert Jabari's shooting into the starting lineup. The Rockets offense is going to take a monumental step forward this next season. And defensively, they're still going to be the same absolutely defensive, stifling presence that they were this past year. In fact, I think the defense is also going to be taking a step forward this upcoming season. Coming up, I do want to continue to talk about some of the offensive stuff, and I want to address one of the biggest concerns that I think Rockets fans have right now, which is the lack of guard depth and potentially what the playmaking situation is going to look like for this Rockets team next year. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it absolutely can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. Look, when I first started using Monarch, I'll admit, I was shocked and I was a little embarrassed at how much money I was spending on just food, like dining out at restaurants, fast food, food delivery services. It was honestly appalling. Now I budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your very first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so one thing that I want to kind of piggyback off of from the first segment before getting into some of the passing stuff here, the playmaking stuff, the guard stuff, is I mentioned, right, so clearly the Rockets' biggest weakness was their lack of a go-to scorer, but one of their second biggest weakness, if you will, was just their inability to knock down outside shots. Their three-point shooting was abysmal last season. And I do really think that with the additions of both Kevin Durant and Dorian Finney-Smith, who both shot over 40% on threes this past season, then you also, again, you get Fred VanVleet, who's in a better, more ancillary role. So hopefully his three-point percentage goes back up. You get Jabari Smith Jr., who's actually shooting the lights out of the basketball after having the most atrocious shooting month of November ever to start the year. He was like literally the worst catch and shoot player in the NBA. He was shooting like 15% on catch and shoot opportunities in the month of November. After that stretch, he was on fire. Like he really picked it up. And I really I truly believe Jabari will be able to enter this next year and be, above league average from long distance. If he's hovering around 36, 37, 38%, that's a massive win there. And then the last and potentially maybe most important piece of the puzzle here will also be Alperen Sengun, who reportedly, and from what we've seen from his workout videos and stuff back home in Turkey, the dude is he's working on that three ball tirelessly. And for Sengun, he doesn't ever need to become, Nikola Jokic with like an absolute burner from three. But if he can get that three ball to a consistent 33, 34, 35%, just to keep defenses honest and to really space the floor, especially in some of those double big lineups that we're bound to see with him and Adams and likely Clint Capella down the line as well. That'll really start to open things up for the offense. So that's exciting stuff to consider as well. And even Ime Thompson to a lesser degree, right? Pardon me. We saw Ime Thompson really grow and develop as a corner three-point shooter this past season. And I fully expect him to take another step forward as a shooter. Now, I don't think Amen's going to suddenly start knocking down step back three-pointers or something. But as long as he can keep a defense honest and force them to guard him at the three-point line, that'll open up so much for his game and so much for the Rockets offense. So I want to address here and talk about one of the kind of bigger concerns. And this was a concern that I held, for the most part, throughout free agency. And that is the Rockets kind of playmaking dynamics for this upcoming season. And in specific, right, their guard play. Because on paper, the Rockets, after all these moves that they made and everything that they've accomplished this offseason, they only have three, primary initiators on paper. Or three primary ball handlers, because they have two other primary initiators in Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun, even if you don't necessarily consider them primary ball handlers. So the primary ball handlers are Fred VanVleet, Ime Thompson, and Reed Sheppard. And there's a lot of pressure on Reed Sheppard to be able to live up to the expectations that the Rockets have of him, to be able to fulfill that role as the third playmaker on the roster. But I went back and I wanted to look at the Rockets playmaking numbers from this past season, because there's a lot of Rockets fans that are, majorly concerned about losing Jalen Green, who was one of the Rockets' primary ball handlers and one of their primary offensive initiators and lead playmakers. What will the offense ultimately look like this upcoming year? So first and foremost, again, a lot of the offense is going to run through one of Kevin Durant or Alperen Sengun. considerably, right? You're going to run plenty of different actions. You'll run certain like screening actions with KD as the primary screener, and then have him like, pop out to the 3-point line with a flare screen being set for him. Like, you can do all sorts of creative stuff to get KD open. And that's where you have, one of Fred or Amin or Reed handling the basketball and distributing it and getting it to him. But I went back and I wanted to look at the sheer passing numbers from this past season. And they were a little shocking, and maybe they'll be shocking for you as well. So in the regular season, Alperen Sengun was the number one playmaker for the Rockets. And that matches the eye test. So much of the Rockets offense ran through Alperen Sengun. And that's one of the most exciting things about getting Kevin Durant, is imagining some of the creative stuff that Ime Udoka will be able to run, utilizing the two-man game of Alperen Sengun and Kevin Durant. Like, imagine Alp operating out of the elbow, or even, out of the low post, and then having Kevin Durant come flying off like a pin down and getting wide open for three, or coming off a curl, or curling off a screen at the free throw line, or at the free throw line extended, and then get like an easy mid-range bucket off a pass from Sengun because he's commanding attention down low in the post. There's so many different offensive opportunities there. But these are the numbers from this past season. Sengun led the team with 372 assists, 688 potential assists, and 960 assist points. So those are points created off of his assists. Fred VanVleet was second with 333 assists, 656 potential assists, and then 869 assist points. Jalen Green was third with 282 assists, 549 potential assists, and then 722 assist points. And then Amin Thompson, despite the fact that Amin Thompson only played in 69 total games, nice, and only started 42 of them, Amin Thompson's numbers are right there neck and neck with Jalen Green's as far as playmaking goes. Amin Thompson had 265 assists, so only 17 less than Jalen, 504 potential assists, so 45 less than Jalen, and then 694 assist points created, which is 28 points created less than Jalen. And again, he did that with 13 fewer games played and only starting 42 of the 69 games that he did actually play. So when you look at those numbers and you imagine what the Rockets are going to look like this next season, I have zero worries about their ability to manufacture offense, to create opportunities for each other within the flow of the offense, especially now that they have an offensive weapon as deadly as Kevin Durant. Think about every single offensive possession for the Rockets last year that ended with Sengun or Amin or Fred creating an opportunity for Jalen Green that unfortunately didn't get converted. Or conversely, and this is the other side of the things, is, these guys are not perfect, right? Sengun needs to be a much better finisher around the rim. He took a significant step back with his touch around the basket this past season. That absolutely needs to improve. And I think we've got the body of work from Sengun for his first 3 years in the NBA to believe that it will get back to where it needs to be. For Amin Thompson, he needs to become a more reliable outside shooter and a somewhat better decision maker, because there are times when Amin Thompson, decides to drive into traffic or make a poor decision with the ball, and he's still trying to learn and feel out his game offensively. And then for Fred, kind of already addressed this, but Fred at times had to shoulder a much bigger offensive burden than I think he is, equipped for or equipped to handle. And because of that, I think that he dealt with some rough shooting nights. He dealt with some stretches where he was essentially trying to do too much because there wasn't anybody else that could do anything at times if Jalen didn't have it on the perimeter. So I think that the Rockets are going to be in a really great spot next season with those three guys as their primary facilitators, with Sengun, VanVleet, and Amin Thompson. And then you also factor in KD's facilitating. KD is not bad as a facilitator. In just 62 games this past year, Kevin Durant had 263 assists, 470 potential assists, and 684 assist points. That clocks in at right about the numbers that Amin Thompson had, and he did it in 7 fewer games than Amin Thompson. So KD is by no stretch of the imagination going to be one of the team's leading playmakers. But he's also not a slouch, and the way that we saw Jalen Green effectively blitzed and completely taken out of the series against the Warriors, that doesn't happen against KD because the dude is like 7 feet tall and crazy long arms. And the moment he sees a double team coming, he's tall enough that he can see over the top of the defense and find exactly where that outlet pass is to get the defense in rotation and create opportunities for his teammates. So you've got so much working here where the Rockets can play through Kevin Durant and create opportunities for Amin or Sengun or Fred or Jabari. They can play through Sengun and create easy kind of shoot opportunities for everybody else. They can space the floor with 5-out spacing and allow Amin Thompson to get downhill and get to his drive and kick game to involve everybody else. There's so many different ways that the Rockets can initiate offense. They still have Fred VanVleet, tried and true, right? Just run pick and roll with Fred VanVleet and let him try to set something up. They have so many different ways they can initiate offense this upcoming season. I would be absolutely shocked if the Rockets were not a legitimate top 10 offense, as well as being, I'm going to say on paper, probably a top 3 defense. And if you can be a top 3 defense and a top 10 offense, that is a legitimate championship caliber team, bar none. Like full stop, full blown championship caliber squad. Coming up, I do want to talk about some of the defensive side of things and what we can expect on that side of the basketball. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's switch gears here and talk about the defensive side of things. And then if I can, I'll get into some lineup expectations as well. But one thing that we talked about at a few different points last season is the fact that the Rockets, despite how effective they were defensively, they were one of the most undersized teams across the board when it came to their starting lineup. Fred VanVleet, undersized for his position. Jalen Green, undersized for his position. Dillon Brooks, undersized for his position. Alperen Sengun, slightly undersized for his position. The only player that they had as a plus size player at their respective position was Jabari Smith Jr. And then when they swapped out Jabari Smith Jr. for Amin Thompson, they then became downsized literally across the board. The Rockets were undersized at all 5 positions once that change happened. So you take that look and then you flip it to the projected starting lineup this upcoming season, where you still have Fred VanVleet as your starting point guard, undersized. Although Fred plays a lot bigger than he actually is. Yes, he's only 6 feet tall, but he's much stronger than he looks. Not even much stronger than he looks. He looks strong. He looks stocky, but he can switch. He can guard bigger players. He's not a defensive liability, at all on that side of the floor, unless he gets like posted up by like a legitimate big. So Fred VanVleet still undersized, but now the Rockets will have plus size and length at 3 of their 5 starting positions, because Amin Thompson is now a plus size defender at that 2 guard spot. Kevin Durant, 7 feet tall, guarding on the wing, is a plus size defender. Jabari Smith Jr., back in the starting lineup, more than likely, will be a plus size defender. And then Alperen Sengun, who is still, albeit a slight bit undersized for his position, has grown tremendously as a defensive force and is absolutely the defensive backbone of this Rockets team. And so you look at that and to put it in perspective, right? The Rockets basically, they gave up Dillon Brooks and Jalen Green. Dillon Brooks, who was 6'6" with a 6'6" wingspan, and Jalen Green, who was 6'4" with a 6'7" wingspan. And they add Kevin Durant, who is listed as 6'11", but let's be real, KD's 7 feet tall, with a 7'4" wingspan. They get Dorian Finney-Smith, who is 6'7" with a 7-foot wingspan. And then they have Jabari Smith Jr., who's 6'11" with a 7'1" wingspan. Tari Eason, who's 6'7" with a 7'2" wingspan. And Amin Thompson, who is 6'7" with a 7-foot wingspan. The Rockets have an absurd amount of size and length across the board. Like, if we thought it was good this past season, like how great they were defensively, how elite they were at rebounding, how physical they were on the defensive side of the ball, it's about to get dialed up to 11 this next season. And when you imagine all the different defensive lineup permutations that the Rockets can throw out there to really mess with opposing teams, their best defensive lineup is going to be Ime Thompson at the point guard slot, Dorian Finney-Smith, Kevin Durant, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith Jr. That is first off, that's a 5-out lineup offensively, which means you put the ball in Ime Thompson's hands or you put the ball in KD's hands and let KD isolate or let Ime Thompson get downhill. And if teams collapse on Ime Thompson on the drive, or if they try to double team KD, while he's isolating from the elbow or on the perimeter, then it's a wide open shot from 3 for somebody else. So very simple offense to run there with that lineup. And I'm sure we'll see plenty of that lineup next season. But defensively, that is a switch everything 1 through 5. Your smallest player on the floor is 6'7", and you still aren't giving up any height because you've got 2 almost legitimate 7-footers out there between KD and Jabari to soak up the rebounds and box out and close out defensive possession strong. The Rockets are going to have like a crazy kind of like death ball lineup that they can throw at teams. And I don't know how teams are going to handle it. It's going to be really brutal to witness because I don't see how you guard that. And I don't see how you beat that team while they're playing defense. So, and I do think that, as our good friend of the program, Locked on Suns host Benjamin Garcia was so kind to illustrate in a couple of his different crossovers with us, KD is very much still a plus level defender. And the fact that at times he was the Suns' best defender last season on a team that was really bad defensively, I think that KD is going to fit in just fine here in Houston. And I know there are maybe some concerns on the surface about having 36-year-old KD out there guarding on the perimeter, consistently on a night in, night out basis. But it also really wouldn't shock me, right? Because you're going to have Ime is going to check the opposing team's best perimeter player. Then you'll put Fred on the opposing team's best guard. Then you'll throw Jabari on whoever the third best perimeter wing scorer or whatever is. And then that leaves KD, his role of guarding kind of whoever's left over at that point. And, you can envision like, hell, let's use the Denver Nuggets as a matchup example here defensively, right? So they added Cam Johnson. So the Nuggets starting lineup is Jamal Murray, Christian Brown, Cam Johnson, Aaron Gordon, and Nikola Jokic. So obviously Sengun guards Jokic. And then how would you match everybody else up across the board? I think that you put Ime Thompson on Jamal Murray easily. You stick Fred VanVleet on Christian Brown. And then that leaves both KD and Jabari to decide who they want to guard between Cam Johnson and Aaron Gordon. Now, I would argue that you probably just put KD on Aaron Gordon simply because AG is not nearly the offensive threat that Cam Johnson is, and you would much rather have Jabari having to chase Cam Johnson around screens and fight over picks and do all that dirty work. But KD is more than capable of guarding either of those guys. That's the crazy part. And he's going to be just fine on switches too. Like, defensively, I really don't see the worry until you run into a team that might be willing to start like multiple guards. And that's where you start to run into an issue is if you have one of KD or Jabari having to check an undersized player as, from tip off, that's where you might get into a situation where you could see Ime Udoka potentially elect to change up his starting lineup, or maybe he elects to start Dorian Finney-Smith instead of Jabari Smith Jr. or starting Tari Eason instead of Jabari Smith Jr. potentially to have a little bit more speed on the perimeter to keep up with some smaller players. I think that's certainly in Ime's wheelhouse to potentially switch up the lineup as needed to match up, from a defensive perspective. But this Rockets team was a top 5 defense last season, and I think they'll be top 3. In fact, I think they'll finish top 2 right there with the OKC Thunder. Assuming the Thunder have another phenomenal defensive season, I think the Rockets will be right there on their tails defensively. And this doesn't even factor in like so many of the other ways that the Rockets can play defense. Like now, they can effectively, if they really want to, we might actually see the Rockets run some zone defense without the double big lineup. because last season we saw the Rockets run double big, and when they ran double big, they would run zone defense with Steven Adams anchoring the middle, and then Jabari Smith Jr. and Alperen Sengun on the two sides of the backside of that 2-3 zone, with any combination of Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Amin Thompson, or Tari Eason at the top of that 2-3 zone. This upcoming season, you can do the same thing. You can just have Sengun anchoring the middle, and then you have 2 7-footers flanking him in KD and Jabari Smith Jr. And then you still have your point of attack guys at the front with Fred VanVleet, Amin Thompson, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Tari Eason to guard out there on the perimeter at the top of the 2-3 zone. So we might actually see more zone even outside, even away from the double big lineups this upcoming season for the Rockets. And yeah, the double big lineup is absolutely a thing that I think we'll see a lot more of. In fact, shout out to a good friend of the program, Paolo Alves, who suggested he put on his biggest tinfoil hat, and he suggested that the reason that the Rockets went and got Clint Capella is that they fully intend on starting Steven Adams and Alperen Sengun together, and that the starting lineup for the Rockets would be Fred, Amin, KD, Sengun, and Adams. Honestly, I don't hate it, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. It might happen in a situational matchup. I wouldn't put it past Ime to tinker with that starting lineup and maybe, sit Jabari one game and start Adams instead. If the Rockets really want to go for that, mega size lineup and just play outright bully ball with the opposing team. But the double big lineup's going to have a huge focus this next season, and all the different things that it'll unlock for everybody else. Thinking about Steven Adams setting screens for KD once again, 2 old teammates reunited. And I know I mentioned it in another episode. I probably should have mentioned it when we were talking about the offensive side of things here a moment ago, but right. Rockets fans are worried about, only having 2 guards on the team, and they're both undersized guards in Fred VanVleet and Reed Shepherd. The NBA is positionless now. Doesn't matter that you don't have guards on the team. What matters is do you have ball handlers? Do you have wings? And do you have bigs? And that's it. And the Rockets have more wings and more bigs than they know what to do with. They've only got a couple guards, a couple ball handlers, in Fred, Reed, and Amin Thompson, who is, sized like a wing, but the Rockets treat him like a ball handler, or they will be treating him like a ball handler next season. Those are the roles that you occupy on a basketball floor these days. And so, yes, the Rockets don't have a combo guard or a true 2 guard on the roster. And no, Cam is not a true 2 guard. He's a wing as well. They don't have that piece of the equation, but it kind of doesn't matter because, again, the Rockets view KD as their 2 guard. He's going to be the guy taking the majority of shots for this team. He's going to be the guy leading the team in scoring, in field goal attempts. He's going to be the guy that's your closer, taking the toughest shots at the end of the clock or at the end of a game. And when you look at historically what the 2 guard has done, that's generally been the 2 guard's role, unless you're like a 3-and-D 2 guard, like a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope or something. So Rockets are in a good spot, I think, with their roster construction, with what they'll be able to achieve offensively and defensively this next season. KD is going to fit in seamlessly, and he's going to elevate this team to, I'm not ready to predict 60 plus wins, but health permitting, knock on wood, this team is going to win 60 plus games next year. I think it's a pretty easy feat for them to achieve. They dropped some really easy winnable games this past season that they absolutely should have won. And the games that they lost this past season are games that if they had Kevin Durant in place of Jalen Green, they would have absolutely won. So with that, those are my thoughts on how KD fits in with this Rockets team. I'm curious from all the KD fans who have joined us here over at Locked On Rockets, which again, welcome. We appreciate you guys for coming on board. Happy to have you on the hype train. But I want your thoughts. If you guys have been following KD his whole career, right? How do you think he fits into this Rockets team? Was I on point? Was I completely off base? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform you're choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.